ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਪਰਮ ਪਿਤਾ ਪਰਮੇਸ਼ਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਚਰਨਾਂ 'ਚ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਪਿਆਰਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਚਰਨਾਂ 'ਚ ਅਰਬਾਂ ਖਰਬਾਂ ਬਾਰ ਡੰਡੌਤ ਬੰਦਨਾ। ਆਈ ਸਾਰੀ ਸੰਗਤ ਦੇ ਚਰਨਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਡੰਡੌਤ ਬੰਦਨਾ। ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ। ਜੇ ਅੱਜ ਮੈਂ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ ਫੋਨ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਜੋ ਅੱਜ ਕੱਲ੍ਹ ਸਮਾਂ ਚੱਲ ਰਿਹਾ ਆ, ਕਈ ਵਾਰੀ ਗਲਤ ਸੁਸਾਇਟੀ ਦੇ ਕਾਰਨ ਗਲਤ ਪਾਸੇ ਤੁਰ ਪੈਂਦੇ ਆ, ਨਸ਼ਿਆਂ ਪੱਤਿਆਂ 'ਚ ਜਾਂ ਡਿਪਰੈਸ਼ਨ 'ਚ, ਜਾਂ ਸੋ ਮੈਨੀ ਰੀਜ਼ਨ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ। ਫਿਰ ਕਈ ਵਾਰੀ ਮੈਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦਾ ਵੀ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਨਾਲ ਮੇਰੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਾਵੋ। ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਅੰਕਲ ਜੀ ਉਹ ਅੰਬੈਰਸਡ ਫੀਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ, ਉਹ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ। ਫਿਰ ਉਹ ਸਾਡੇ 'ਤੇ ਵੀ ਮੈਡ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ ਵੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਡੀ ਇਨਸਲਟ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ, ਬੇਇੱਜ਼ਤੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ। ਦੇਖੋ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਤਾਂ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਹੈ, ਜੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਆ ਤਾਂ ਉਹ ਦੱਸਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਤਾਂ ਕਿ ਆਪਾਂ ਉਹਦੀ ਸੋਲਵ ਕਰੀਏ। ਪਰ ਜੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਲੁਕੋਈ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਉਸ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਸਾਲਵ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੁੰਦੀ। ਉਹ ਸਿਆਣੇ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਜੇ ਕੋਈ ਬਿਮਾਰੀ ਹੈ ਕੋਠੇ 'ਤੇ ਚੜ੍ਹ ਕੇ ਰੌਲੀ ਪਾਓ, ਫਿਰ ਕੋਈ ਜਣਾ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਹੈਲਪ ਕਰੂਗਾ। ਪਰ ਜੇ ਦੱਸਾਂਗੇ ਨਹੀਂ, ਅੰਦਰ ਹੀ ਰੂਮ 'ਚ ਵੜੇ ਰਹਾਂਗੇ ਤਾਂ ਉਹ ਗੱਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਬਣਦੀ। ਸੋ ਮੇਰਾ ਬੇਟਾ ਗੈਰੀ ਗੁਰਮਿੰਦਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਹੋਠੀ, ਉਹਦਾ ਗੈਰੀ ਸਾਦੇ ਸ਼ਾਟ ਨੇ, ਮੈਂ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਰਿਕੁਐਸਟ ਕੀਤੀ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਜੇ ਤੂੰ ਮੇਰੀ ਹੈਲਪ ਕਰੇ। ਚਲੋ ਪਿਛਲੀ ਵੀਕ ਇਹਨੇ ਬੀਜੀ ਸੀ, ਵਕੇਸ਼ਨ 'ਤੇ ਜਾਣਾ ਸੀ। ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਕੋਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਡੈਡੀ ਮੈਂ ਇਸ ਵੀਕ ਕਰ ਦੂੰਗਾ, ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ। ਉਹ ਹੁਣ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਪਤਾ, ਇੱਕ ਤਾਂ ਉਹ ਇਸ ਫੀਲਡ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆ, ਦੂਜਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਾਉਂਸਲਿੰਗ ਕਰਦਾ ਆ, ਡਰੱਗਾਂ ਛਡਾਉਂਦਾ ਆ। ਇੱਕ ਚਲੋ ਇਹਦਾ ਆਪਣਾ ਐਕਸਪੀਰੀਅੰਸ ਵੀ ਆ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਗਲਤ ਸੁਸਾਇਟੀ ਕਰਕੇ ਥੋੜ੍ਹਾ ਇੱਧਰ ਪੈ ਗਿਆ ਸੀ। ਪਰ ਪਰਮਾਤਮਾ ਦੀ ਕਿਰਪਾ ਨਾਲ ਮੈਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਪ੍ਰਾਊਡ ਫੀਲ ਕਰਦਾ ਹਾਂ ਵੀ ਅੱਜ ਇਹ ਦੂਜਿਆਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਛਡਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਆ। ਇਹ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਸੀ ਡੈਡੀ ਜੇ ਮੈਂ ਪੈਸੇ ਨਾ ਵੀ ਵਾਲੇ ਬਣਨ ਪਰ ਮੈਂ ਬੱਚੇ ਹੀ ਸੇਵ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤੇ, ਉਹੀ ਮੇਰੀ ਸੇਵਿੰਗ ਹੈ ਜਾਂ ਪ੍ਰੋਪਰਟੀ। ਮੈਂ ਇਸ ਚੀਜ਼ ਦਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਇਹਦਾ ਐਪਰੀਸ਼ੀਏਟ ਕਰਦਾ, ਪ੍ਰਾਊਡ ਵੀ ਕਰਦਾ ਹਾਂ। ਤਾਂ ਚੰਗੇ ਪਾਸੇ ਲੱਗਾ ਆ। ਸੱਚੇ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਹੀ ਰੱਖੇ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਨਾ ਵੀ ਵਾਲੇ ਪੈਸੇ ਕਮਾਉਣ ਤਾਂ ਦੈਟਸ ਓਕੇ। ਮੈਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਇੰਜੋਏਮੈਂਟ ਕਰੋ। ਅਸੀਂ ਮਿਹਨਤ ਕੀਤੀ, ਇੰਡੀਆ ਤੋਂ ਆਏ ਆ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਜੋਗੇ ਤਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਵੈਸੇ ਖਾਣ ਪੀਣ ਜੋਗੇ ਛੱਡ ਹੀ ਜਾਣੇ, ਘਰ ਵੀ ਛੱਡ ਜਾਣਾ, ਥੋੜ੍ਹਾ ਬੜਾ ਬਿਜ਼ਨਸ ਵੀ ਛੱਡ ਜਾਣਾ। ਇਹ ਜੇ ਲੋਕ ਸੇਵਾ ਕਰਨ, ਆਪਣੀ ਵਕੇਸ਼ਨ ਕਰਨ, ਇੰਜੋਏ ਕਰਨ, ਬਹੁਤ ਵਧੀਆ ਆ। ਸੋ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਐਕਸਪੀਰੀਅੰਸ ਵੀ ਆ। ਬਾਕੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਤੋਂ ਵੀ ਪਹਿਲੀ ਜਨਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਤੋਂ ਥੋੜ੍ਹੀਆਂ ਗਲਤੀਆਂ ਹੋਈਆਂ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਗੈਰੀ ਨੇ ਵੀ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਕਹੀ ਕਿ ਡੈਡੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇੰਨਾ ਟਾਈਮ ਨਹੀਂ ਦੇ ਸਕੇ, ਜਾਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਨੌਲੇਜ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀਗੀ। ਦੂਜਾ ਪਹਿਲੀ ਜਨਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਕਰਕੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਮਿਹਨਤ ਬਹੁਤ ਕਰਨੀ ਪਈ। 16 18 20 ਘੰਟੇ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਨਾ ਪਿਆ। ਹਾਲਾਂਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਵਾਈਫ ਨੂੰ ਕੰਮ 'ਤੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਲਾਇਆ ਵੀ ਤੂੰ ਨਿਆਣੇ ਟੇਕ ਕਰ, ਪਰ ਸਟਿਲ ਫਾਦਰ ਦੀ ਫਿਰ ਵੀ ਮੈਂ ਆਪਣੀ ਜੋਬ 'ਚੋਂ ਟਾਈਮ ਕੱਢ ਕੇ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਕਰਾਟੀ 'ਚ ਵੀ, ਜੁੱਡੋ 'ਚ ਵੀ, ਬੇਸਬਾਲ 'ਚ ਵੀ, ਜਿੱਥੇ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਜਿੰਨਾ ਕੁ ਪਾ ਸਕਦਾ ਸੀ ਮੈਂ ਕੀਤੀ। ਪਰ ਸਟਿਲ ਮੈਂ ਸਮਝਦਾ ਮੇਰੇ ਤੋਂ ਪੂਰਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਦੇ ਹੋਇਆ। ਗਿਆਨ ਦੀ ਨੌਲੇਜ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀਗੀ, ਦੂਜੀ ਮਿਹਨਤ ਵੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਕਰਨੀ ਪਈ ਆ। ਸੋ ਇਸ ਲਈ ਮੈਂ ਹੁਣ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਗੈਰੀ ਨੂੰ ਹੀ ਰਿਕੁਐਸਟ ਕਰਦਾ ਕਿ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ ਐਕਸਪੀਰੀਅੰਸ। ਤਾਂ ਇਹ ਨਾਲੇ ਇੰਗਲਿਸ਼ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਬੱਚੇ ਸਮਝ ਵੀ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ। ਜਿਹੜੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਸਿੱਧੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਉਹ ਇਹ ਵੀਡੀਓ ਰਾਹੀਂ ਕਰਨਗੇ। ਇਹ ਅੱਜ ਜਿੰਨਾ ਕੁ ਟਾਈਮ ਲਾਊਗਾ, ਅੱਧਾ ਪੌਣਾ ਘੰਟਾ ਇਹ ਲਾ ਲੂਗਾ। ਫਿਰ ਮੈਂ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰੂੰਗਾ ਕਿ ਹਰੇਕ ਵੀਕ ਜੇ ਇਹ ਥੋੜ੍ਹਾ ਟਾਈਮ ਦਊਗਾ ਤਾਂ ਕਿ ਆਪਾਂ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਗਲਤ ਪਾਸਿਓਂ ਕੱਢ ਕੇ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਪਰਮਾਤਮਾ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਜੋੜ ਸਕੀਏ। ਦੂਜੀ ਗੱਲ ਇਹ ਹੈ, ਜਿੰਨਾ ਚਿਰ ਗੈਰੀ ਨਾਲ ਮੈਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਇਸ ਵਿਸ਼ੇ 'ਤੇ, ਜਿੰਨਾ ਚਿਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਐਡਮਿਟ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦੇ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਮੇਰੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਗਲਤੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ, ਮੇਰੀ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਆ, ਉਨਾ ਚਿਰ ਉਹ ਸੋਲਵ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੁੰਦੀ। ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਐਡਮਿਟ ਕਰਨ ਬੱਚੇ ਜਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਆਹ ਗਲਤੀ ਆ, ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਆ, ਫਿਰ ਉਹਦਾ ਸਲਿਊਸ਼ਨ ਵੀ ਮਿਲ ਜਾਂਦਾ, ਚਾਹੇ ਟਰੀਟਮੈਂਟ ਆ, ਚਾਹੇ ਕਾਉਂਸਲਿੰਗ ਆ, ਜਾਂ ਜੋ ਵੀ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ। ਸੋ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਬੱਚੇ ਐਡਮਿਟ ਕਰਨ। ਹਜੇ ਕਿਉਂ ਬੱਚੇ ਐਡਮਿਟ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ? ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਸਾਡੀ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਨਹੀਂ ਗੀ, ਉਹ ਅਸੀਂ ਓਕੇ ਹੀ ਆ, ਜਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਫਨ ਲਈ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ, ਜਾਂ ਉਹ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਐਗਜ਼ਾਇਟੀ ਆ, ਮੈਨੂੰ ਥੋੜ੍ਹਾ ਡਿਪਰੈਸ਼ਨ ਹੈ, ਉਹਦੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਮੈਂ ਡਰੱਗ ਖਾਂਦਾ ਆ ਜਾਂ ਨਸ਼ਾ ਕਰਦਾ। ਨਹੀਂ, ਇਹ ਐਕਸਕਿਊਜ਼ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ। ਸੋ ਮੈਂ ਗੈਰੀ ਤੂੰ ਬਾਕੀ ਆਪਣਾ ਜੋ ਵੀ ਪੁੱਤ ਕਰ ਸਕਦਾ ਹੈ ਤੂੰ ਸਮਝਾ, ਤਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਸਾਈਡ 'ਤੇ ਬਹਿ ਕੇ ਸੁਣਦਾ ਹਾਂ। ਫਿਰ ਉਦੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਇਹਦੇ ਤੋਂ ਮੈਂ ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਫਿਰ ਇਹ ਤੋਂ ਸਮਝ ਕੇ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ 'ਚ ਮੈਂ ਉਹ ਥੋੜ੍ਹੀ ਟਰਾਂਸਲੇਟ ਵੀ ਕਰ ਦਊਂਗਾ ਵੀ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ 'ਚ ਦਾ ਮੀਨ ਨੀਂਦ ਤਾਂ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਇੰਗਲਿਸ਼ 'ਚ ਹੀ ਕਰਨੀ ਹੈ, ਵਿੱਚ ਥੋੜ੍ਹੀ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ 'ਚ ਵੀ ਕਰ ਦੂਗਾ। ਸੋ ਕੋਈ ਨਹੀਂ, ਆਉਣ ਰਹਿਣ ਦੇ, ਗੈਰੀ ਆਈ ਲੱਗਾ। ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ। ਆ ਜਾ ਗੈਰੀ।
Hello, Sat Shri Akal. Very grateful for this opportunity. Like Dad was saying, not only do I have my personal experience, but, I was fortunate to go to school, become a counselor. I entered the field as a substance use counselor, went on to get a master's degree in social work. First thing, though, I do have to say that, this is my own experience. I'm not representing any agency or organization. It's my personal views, again, based on my education and experience. Please continue to consult a medical professional, seek counseling, therapy, treatment. Again, we're not making any promises here that are going to, treat you or get you well. This is just a discussion, again, sharing my experience, strength, and hope. Hopefully, you will find something beneficial to help not only you, but your family and your community. Again, if alone, I only know a little, right? But together, with you included, the viewers, our extended community, we know more together, right? Individually, sometimes, we think we know the answer, but ultimately it's in the community and in Sangat, right? That we come to find out how little we know and how much more other people know and the importance of that. So Dad said a lot of great things, actually, to begin with. I'll try to talk a little bit about those things as well. I think the bigger context of the talk and the discussion, we want to talk a little bit about my history. We want to talk a little bit about what prevention means. We want to talk a little bit about what treatment is, right? Or what are some ways that people kind of end up using and how they can get out of that. For some people it is going to Gurdwara church, but for others, it involves going to treatment, and unfortunately for some it involves going to jail, right? Those consequences. And in the extreme, unfortunately, there are people that end up dying, right? And the impact that has on not only the community, it can go both ways, right? Sometimes we can have a friend die or a loved one die, and it sends us further into depression, right? And we get stuck and we continue to mourn, but we're not able to come out of that and really process that grief, right? So we can bring healing, and move forward. And then again, how to stay sober, right? In terms of recovery, right? So a little bit of the history, prevention, kind of why people use treatment, and then recovery, right? And the importance of staying sober. Like I was saying, even the word, sober in Punjabi, it's called Sofi, right? Or Sufi even. Which is really, really a blessing. And I'm sure Dad can talk a little more about, the connection there. It's really important, right? The word Sufi and Sofi, right? To be clean. The word sober in English means to have soundness of mind, right? To have a clear mind. And how important that is, right? Because I think, unfortunately, many people that get into substance use are seeking something, right? Paal deakosh, right? They're looking for something. And unfortunately, they're looking in the wrong places, right? Ultimately, it's within us, right? That thing that we're searching outside, and if we can realize that, we can get that alignment and just kind of live our life, in more peace, tranquility, contentment, right? And that's really, the goal here, right? Is sabr santok, having, peace. But again, unfortunately, many of us that, sought that in substances, right? So a little bit about my history. I was probably 8 years old when I first had a sip of beer. It was at the house, right? I had I think some uncles were over, and that's a little bit about the culture we'll talk about. I'm going to kind of mix it up here, but it was a normal thing. Obviously my dad, doesn't drink, but back in the day, if we had relatives coming over, it's such a big part of Punjabi culture. It's a big part of any culture, right? Western culture here in America, England, Canada, wherever, right? All over the world. Whether it's a birthday, a graduation, a wedding, or conversely, a divorce, a funeral, we're always, trying to drink and kind of push those emotions down or make the fun time funner, right? So it's really a big part of our culture and our community. Again, with the whole kind of like Punjabi, Bhangra, kind of do it up, drink it up, let's go party, let's go kick it, especially in the younger generation too, right? We see that in all the music videos, right? Not all, excuse me, but you see that in a lot of videos and stuff. Obviously we see it at the weddings. And remember, I don't mean to say that all people that, use substances or drink are bad people. By no means is that my message. Obviously there is problematic use. There's people that can have a little bit. I'm not one of those people. Right. And so this message is really targeted towards people that, went into problematic use. Right. Do I wish everybody, was sober or didn't use? Yeah, it might be a little bit easier, but that's just not the culture that we live in. Remembering though that our gurus, right, people of all faith, right, really, emphasize the importance of being sober. Right. It was built into, lots of religious doctrine. I think they kind of knew, right? That unfortunately this may not cause everybody to have, horrific experiences or a bad life, but even those 10% or that 20% of the people or the population that would struggle, it's not worth it, right? It's not worth it to even lose. I got a best friend, he passed away, but, there was 3 brothers, two are gone. And that's just one of the many people. And I'm sure, those of you listening, you can also attest or share multiple experiences of folks losing loved ones, right? And, just the impact that has, also losing, opportunities, jobs, divorce, relationships, on and on and on, so getting back to, like I said, I was probably about 8 years old. One of my uncles, I think that we were doing some construction or something in the house, and they had a beer and, just had a sip. So I didn't get, right, but again, it just shows, I love my family, love my, my relatives, my uncles, my cousins, everybody, right? And nobody wants somebody to go through a life of suffering, but you just never know, right? You just never know the impact that one little sip, or kind of being around it is going to have. The first time I probably got drunk, was about 12 years old. And again, like I was saying, we had alcohol in the home. Again, it was mostly for entertaining, right? Like when relatives would come over, but I grew up seeing that, right? I grew up seeing kind of like, oh, this is what adults do, or this is what men do. And, in our culture, a lot of the separation, men would be in one room, kind of eating, drinking. Women would be in another room, that type of thing, right? So just wanted to share just the impact that has, I think, on a young mind. We'll talk more about this when we get into prevention. But I really want to encourage families to not have alcohol in the home, right? If you can avoid it, I know it's hard, right? When we talk about having parties and weddings, we want to be like, oh, I want to have the most liquor or the most selection. I want to put a bottle at every table, that kind of thing, right? Even me, right? I've had that dream, of entertaining. Again, it's so subtle, right? That it's in our culture this way, right? That if I have the most amount of liquor, or if I have the highest brand liquor at our weddings, if it balle balle jan, everyone will think that I'm such a good person. And it is a struggle, right? Because we know, again, being in Sangat, being in the Gurdwaras, the church, and growing up kind of spiritually, that's not real, what do you say, kind of accolades, right? That's not real, like, you're the best, or you did this, because at the end of the day, it's hurtful, right? Think about the fights that happen at the weddings, or think about, my family, we've had tons of those experiences. And again, love them all, but it's not just our family, right? You know, you hear these types of things happen all throughout, you know, not only in our culture, but everywhere. So again, as a 12-year-old, probably began to sneak a little bit of liquor, right? Taking it out of the bottles. You know, Canadian Mist, Seagram's, right? Chivas Regal. We can go down the list of all the different types of alcohol, you know, there is. The reason I share that is that most of those are dark liquors, right? They're brown. So my family would like leave for the weekend. They'd go to Canada. You know, I'd be home and I'd slowly start to sip away at those, but I'd have to replace it, right? So that's kind of the lying mind, right? You know, the mind thinks it can lie and fool, right? You know, the family or fool whoever. So I had to replace it with water, right? Because at the time, that's all, you know, I could think of. But eventually that brown liquor turns lighter and lighter and lighter. And obviously the potency of it as well, right? You know, isn't as strong. So yeah, but they realized, right? But you kind of lie again. You say, oh, it wasn't me. It was my friends. Or what are you talking about? I think what's important there is to remember, even in the face of evidence, right? That I've been caught, right? You know, I've been doing this. The ego, the kind of the user, still wants to protect itself. And it's important, right? You know, I think, you know, mentioning ego, at the end of the day, there's that quenching of that longing inside, like we were talking about, right? That I'm searching for something outside of myself. I'm searching ultimately for connection, right? You know, of what I've found, what I've read, what I've learned, even substance users, whether it is anxiety, depression, you know, like we said, all the other weddings, funerals, parties. At the end of the day, you know, the people that get into substance use, my experience has been is that they're looking for connection, right? You know, so they're looking for some type of contentment. Again, right? You know, that they're looking to, you know, feel okay with who they are, right? Many times that's what we've heard too, right? You know, the first time I got drunk, oh, wow, I felt like I belonged. All my worries went away, you know, that kind of thing. And at the end of the day, what kind of worries are there, right? You know, we live in America, middle-class family, you know, not a lot of, you know, hardcore work or things that we have to do. But yeah, unfortunately, it kind of went down the wrong road, right? I'll keep it kind of short. You know, from there, from a 12-year-old, started drinking alcohol. By 14, I was smoking weed almost daily, you know, cannabis, marijuana. And that persisted for a long time. By 16, I was doing cocaine, mushrooms, acid. Never really got into heroin or opiates or downers. Did a little bit of them, tried them, you know, a little bit later, Valium, that type of thing in my 20s. But really it was cannabis, right? You know, I'm a huge, you know, fan of cannabis. Obviously justified it by like, oh, you know, I'm a Bhagat of Shivji, or, you know, kind of a big Bob Marley fan, that type of thing, right? You know, and just that culture, right? Kind of trying to be a Rasta and obviously, you know, grow your hair, grow your beard, right? All the while trying to be spiritual, right? Still loving God. Grew up that way, grew up in the home, you know, so trying to attain Vismad, right? You know, Anand, right? You know, but doing it, unfortunately, kind of in something that's ultimately not futile, because it gets you there, kind of, right? But it doesn't keep you there, right? At the end of the day, what keeps you there is, you know, true connection with loved ones, you know, obviously with God, prayer, meditation, worship, right? Kirtan, Seva, Nam Simran, you know, just being in community, right? You know, we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. So yeah, 14, 16, probably smoking weed every day, daily. And not having a lot of money, obviously at that age, not working. So unfortunately, guess what? I had to start stealing. Started stealing from the home, mom's purse. You know, again, we were blessed. Dad, obviously working, you know, busting his butt, you know, 16 hours a day, double shifts, 18 hours, that type of thing. Taking 20s, you know, taking 10s, taking 50s, you know, once in a while taking 100, you know, that type of thing. You know, to go and buy weed, right? To go and buy cannabis and marijuana. With the alcohol, similarly, probably drinking about 5 days a week, you know, as a 14 to 16-year-old. But again, didn't have money, so, you know, we had to start stealing. So all the local neighborhood stores, you know, all the 7-Elevens, you know, Circle K's, Safeways, that type of thing. You know, me and my buddies would walk in, grab 40 ounces or grab, Thunderbird wine, whatever it took. It didn't matter, right? Really, the more potent, the cheaper, the better, right? Because it would get us there. It would get me to that state that, I had tasted. And unfortunately, again, like I said, life wasn't bad by any means, right? In many ways, it was blessed, So unfortunately, once I got a taste of the artificial piece, the artificial blessing or bliss, that comes from the substances, it really got a hold of me. We'll talk a little bit more here in terms of like, what are some of the reasons, kind of physiologically, right? That folks may start using and kind of what it does to you at that neurochemical level. But yeah, at that point, because I didn't have money, so I had to go out and steal, right? I couldn't ask Dad, be like, hey, Dad, let me get 100. I got to go get loaded. That kind of thing. That wouldn't work too well. Even stealing from liquor stores. Luckily, I didn't get into like heavy, like home burglaries, car thefts. Obviously never murdered anybody. Thankfully, I have mugged a couple of people, which I'm not proud of. It's very sad. I'm getting a little teary eyed over it right now, because I'm not a violent person, right? But yeah, I specifically remember, two people in specific, just trying to get $20, and in that $20, it was always $10 had to go to weed, $5 had to go to alcohol, and then $5 had to go to Jumbo Jacks, right? Because you got to eat too. It was all about coming up, and every day was a grind, right? Even if I had to scrape the pipe, that type of thing. And like I said, alcohol usually, was able to steal that. And that's a lot, right? That's a lot for a young 14-year-old, 16-year-old. And again, not everybody's story that's watching this, it is going to relate, to what I'm saying. And my story, again, isn't the worst either, right? So it's important not to get caught up, I think, when we get to kind of when we're saying what recovery is, about the differences in the story, right? And what separates us. What I've learned through kind of the recovery process is that we need to listen to the similarities, right? Listen to, how we can connect to the story, what kind of things might resonate, with me, with you, and really kind of what are we going to do about it, right? And when we talk about our experience, strength, and hope, the experience, my war story, right? My drunkalog, they call it, that's not the point, right? It's not about like, oh, look at everything I did, look at everything, that I went through. No, right? Like I said, I got dead homies. I got uncles that, developed diabetes and, strokes and different things and passed on, right? A lifetime of using. We got enough health conditions as it is, without putting substances in there. And what's interesting about substances in general, right? I remember reading, in one of the books, the difference between a poison and a cure, right, would be dosage, right? So toxicity. Right. So it's some things in a little form. Think of NyQuil, right? Or old kind of taking a little shot to help, or even pharmaceuticals, can be helpful. But again, with community, with a doctor's approval, it becomes different, when we're seeking something or trying to, quiet down whatever inside, noise there is, right? So yeah, so that persisted. Unfortunately, like I said, because I was stealing, doing things, I started to get in trouble, right? I don't know. I think I caught like 12 or 14 juvenile charges, before the age of 18. So it must have been from like the age of 14 to 18. And then by the age of 22, another 4. So I forget the number, if it was like 14 or 16 charges. But I was getting a charge every 9 months. Again, little things, right? Trespassing, theft, that type of thing. A bunch of those. Malicious mischief, right? By 18, I was driving. Dad and them obviously wouldn't sign for me to get my license at 16. They knew, right? They're like, oh, yeah, we've seen this before, right? Dad has talked about, and you hear about also in the rooms, in kind of the recovery circles, right? To do the same thing over and over again is insanity, right? So they talk about kind of making a mistake, right? And if you can learn from it, well, that's a good thing. That's wisdom, right? But if you make the mistake and you don't learn from it, that's what we call insanity, right? And you continue to do that over and over again. And I don't mean to use that word lightly. I also work in the mental health field. And obviously in this day and age, we need to be careful in how we label folks. I know even the words addiction, calling somebody an addict or a drunk, right? I don't, right, want to use those words. Labels do impact people, right? So you grow up being called stupid, or if you grow up being called a drunk or an idiot, right? Those types of things. Not me. I'm not saying I grew up that way, but, if you grow up that way, it makes an impact on you, right? And I'm not perfect again, right? I still have my issues. I'm still in process. Recovery is a process. Obviously, once you attain a certain level, it's a little easier to maintain. But it is work, right? It is a process. Even in meditation or mindfulness, right? We often refer to folks as practitioners, right? Or, whether it's in the dental field or the law field, it's still a practice, right? And even as a social worker, it's a practice, right? I have to practice, and I'm not perfect. Not everybody's going to get it. This is more of a soft science, right? You have the more harder sciences, the computer engineering, those types of things, which are X's and O's and ones and zeros, right? When we're dealing with the human mind and the human brain, the emotions, the ego, the family, the community, all that kind of stuff. It's not, 1 + 1 = 2, right? So unfortunately caught a bunch of charges, spent a little bit of time in juvenile, actually spent some time in adult, down here at the Regional Justice Center in Kent. I forget if it was 10 days or 2 weeks there. A couple 30-day stints up in Seattle at the juvenile hall. But it took that, right? It really did. And again, my story's not, any worse or any better. It just is. It's my story. I wish it didn't take that. Obviously, it took a lot of sleepless nights from my, mom and dad. I remember one time I got arrested out in Auburn, Algona. We were out drinking, and then we were trying to get some, I think we were trying to get Wendy's off of Auburn Way or 15th there, and it had closed, and we were banging on the window, and they called the police, so we all ran, right? I got arrested. For whatever reason, they took me to Algona police station, or they had a cell there. They called Dad. They're like, "Oh, come get your son." He's like, "Nope." He's like, make him walk home. It was a couple hour walk, early in the morning. It was a hard walk, but the kind of the addicted mind, the substance using mind, the ego that's hurt and wounded, right? Constantly, all I was thinking about was getting to my buddy's house so I could smoke some more weed, take another drink. I remember one time I got arrested for, stealing some clothes. Back then it was called, it's called the Commons Mall now. I forget what it was called before that. I apologize, in Federal Way. But I had gotten arrested for, and I wasn't the one. I was more of an accomplice. It was another friend of mine, just stole a shirt. Again, being mischievous, right? Didn't have no business, just trying to whatever, right? Trying to build a personality or build whatever kind of persona, right? That, Gary will go steal, or Gary can go and get a case of beer, that type of thing. I kind of got good at it. Obviously, got caught a bunch of times, but there's many times that we got away, high speed chases, all that good stuff, throwing bottles at, officers. Again, not a war story, just all the insanity, right? And all the different things that we do, when we're not in our right mind, right? When we don't have soundness of mind. But yeah, I had gotten arrested at the Commons Mall. I remember I was in handcuffs. And again, all I could think of the whole way when they were driving me home is just to get home, get out of the handcuffs, go back out with the homies and go get drunk, right? It was the only way. The shame, right? That feeling of like, whatever doom or whatever kind of consequences there were going to be, there was no accountability, right? Just would drink it away or smoke it away and just kept rolling, right? And it kept accumulating, right? It kept accumulating, like I said. Eventually was forced, had to do treatment, right? I think I did outpatient therapy actually down in Kent as well, off of Central Avenue. At the time it was called, well, now it's called Valley Cities. It's by the LA Fitness. That used to be an old newspaper, South something Journal, I forget, South County Journal. But across the street, was an outpatient treatment center. And yeah, so that's kind of what it took, right? That I had to get exposed. At the time, I didn't really know that there were people that had used substances and that had recovered or stopped using substances. Growing up a certain way, and then my friend circle, right, which is unfortunately a big part of it, kind of the birds of a feather flock together, right? Your Sangat, the people that you hang out with. All that, we all used, right? So it was normal to me, right? Again, the literature talks about that, right? Some of the recovery literature talks about, that this is the only normal life we know, right? That over a span of 10 years, right, from the age of basically 12 to 22, the grind was all about getting wasted on a daily basis. I mean, that's a lot of repetitive, ingrained kind of behaviors that really get imprinted, not only on your mind, but, on your mun, on your soul, right? That type of thing. But yeah, we'll come back to, I think, talking a little bit about, the recovery journey a little bit later. I think I wanted to talk, a bit about more of the neurochemistry, that type of thing. One of the things I learned is that 80% of adults who have kind of consequences or have developed, problematic use started before the age of 18. So really, what's really important, I think, to know, like we talked about in the beginning, one, for families, if you have alcohol in the home, get it out, right? If you need help to quit, if you're a father, a mother, an uncle or an aunt, I implore you, I encourage you to also take a look not only at your own substance use, but the impact that is having, on your children and on your community. Again, it might not be problematic, right? You might function, you might go to work, come home, and you're doing okay. But why take the chance, right? Why take the chance? So yeah, so the brain, they say, isn't fully developed even into, your 20s, 25, 24, that type of thing. And it's the frontal lobe up here, right? The forebrain, is the last to develop. So that's kind of your brake system, right? When we talk about Jiminy Cricket, it's your conscience, right? It's the thing that presses the brakes, right? Underneath, if this is the frontal brain over here, thumb is kind of that reptilian brain. It's your limbic system, right? It's the old school emotional reptilian, right? The nucleus accumbens, a couple of other things. I'm sorry, I can't name them all off right now. The amygdala, that type of thing, right? It's your emotional center. It's also your kind of pleasure center, right? So it's your go system. It's like go, go, go. Driving fast. You hear often, unfortunately, too, here in our community, we've lost, Sikhs, Punjabis, Indians, what have you, anybody for that matter, young people driving fast, right, and dying, without substances, right? So that rush, that need, for excitement, it's kind of unfortunately in young people. And if it can be steered correctly, right, into, sports, into education, right, those types of things, then it can really take off in a positive direction, right? That motivation, right? Unfortunately for some of us, we kind of veer off and take it into the wrong direction. So yeah, they say 80% of adults who have problematic use started before the age of 18. So really in terms of prevention, what we're talking about here is, the younger you are, the more at risk you are, right? Now, so I'm 43, sorry. Say I'm a little younger, but probably going to be 44 here in a minute. Next July. So back when I was 12, so 30 years ago, right, it was a big deal for a 12-year-old to use, right? It was like, oh my gosh, 12-year-olds, getting high, getting drunk, 14, what have you. Over my years of work, that number started to get smaller and smaller and smaller, right? We would see a 10-year-old, right? We were like, wow, can't believe a 10-year-old is using. Even now, sometimes you hear of 8-year-olds or even younger. Again, in some situations, there is some dysfunction in the family, right? Like I said, generational, just instability, We're pretty blessed we didn't have those problems, right? But I would be amiss acknowledge that, right? It's a study called ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences, ACE, right? So in those studies, they talk about, a parent that is, has legal complications, right? Two parents working, right? Or even a single parent household, right? And, obviously domestic violence in the home, right? All that good stuff, in terms of mental health and anxiety and depression, things that Dad was talking about. Those things are what we call risk factors, right? We'll bring it home a little bit. We'll talk, maybe what that means in our culture, in our community a little bit more. Dad talked about the shame, right? The guilt. So that stigma, really it's stigma. We hear about it, nowadays more in terms of mental health, but for many years, the push, in the substance use world was really to begin to talk about substance use, right? And especially from a prevention standpoint, but also, just ensuring that the stigma, the shame, because remember, this is thousands of years, right? It's been a part of our culture. It's been a part of human history, right? Substance use has been there, just as long as we've been there. One of the books, I forget, who the author was, it might be called From Chocolate to Morphine. It talks about even the elephant likes the fermented fruit, right? That there's something in us, right, that wants to experience, Vismad and Anand, which is really interesting. An interesting point, certain drugs mimic certain neurochemicals, right? So cocaine largely mimics dopamine, right? Norepinephrine, epinephrine, that's kind of our adrenaline system, right? Again, it's methamphetamines, cocaine, those mimic that. I think alcohol is largely GABA. The opiates largely mimic endorphins, right? So there are natural occurring painkillers in our body. So it's this weird system, right, that the universe has created, that these things in nature, right, actually mimic chemicals that are in our brain and in our body, right? I don't know the exact date, but, up until the last 10 years ago, maybe, cannabis obviously has gotten real popular. It's legal now. Up until, like I said, about a decade ago, they thought the dopaminergic system, the dopamine system, was the most proliferated throughout the body. Again, pain, pleasure, more pleasure, right? Dopamine is pleasure, endorphins are pain. So the pleasure system, again, remember the limbic, right? That reptilian brain, so that go system, that like reward, reward, reward. They thought that was the most proliferated, and it might still be, but new research had been coming out about the endocannabinoid system, right? And this is obviously the system that gets activated by cannabis, right? Endocannabinoid, right? Funny fact, when they began to look at the neurochemical that mimics cannabis, they named it anandamide, right? Which is really a kind of a nod to Anand, right? Bliss. They used a Sanskrit word to name a new neurochemical. And there's hundreds of neurochemicals, right? In my work in terms of education, in terms of substance use, there's like 5 or 6 main ones, right, that they teach us about that specifically mimic, that the drugs specifically mimic, right? So the neurochemistry is big, right? I often used to joke, it takes a monk, years, and, obviously Dad will dispute this, because you can get into that Vismad state, if you're attuned correctly, right? Not very quickly, but it's there, right? It's there for all of us. It's important. And again, I'm not some expert meditator, right? I know the importance of action, right? I can say all these things in terms of what recovery and kind of what wellness is about, but you have to do it, right? Some of us do, get somewhat of a blessing, right? Whether it's from our karmic account from the past, or it's just a little easier, for some of us. But for others of us, because of our histories, because of what we've done, not only in this life, possibly in our last, but definitely, in this life, it's a little bit harder. But, the importance of that meditation, like I said, for some people, it can take weeks, months, years, right, to attain that state of virag, Vismod, right? Anand. The joke is that one hit of weed will get you there, right? And again, that's what we're dealing with, right? It's that microwave culture, that popcorn culture, right? How can I get there quicker? And drugs get you there, right? And unfortunately, once you start using them, your body remembers that, right? It recognizes that, oh, I can get, that same state of bliss, from alcohol. I can get that state of bliss, from cannabis, that type of thing. We're very fortunate, in the last, 10, 15, 20 years and really being in the Sangit and being around a bunch of, this amazing group of young people, that I've been exposed to. I'm so grateful for them. You all know who you are. They're so tight knit, and how important that is, right? How important that is for a community, that they didn't go astray, right? A couple more things on neuroscience. We talked about anandamide, right? So I want you to think about the brain as a pattern recognizer, right? And the mind as a meaning maker, right? So the brain is constantly surveying the scene. It's looking for what's safe, what's not safe, and how I can get my needs met, right? At a bigger level, you can say, how am I going to pass my genes on, that kind of thing, right? Again, I also want you to think about ego throughout this whole process, right? In terms of separation. The ego really, unfortunately, wants to identify itself, right? The mun, the I, right? And how it's different than and apart from others, which is a really integral and interesting thing. That for it to recognize itself, it has to create a separation from others. But that's the downfall, right? That's what unfortunately keeps us from being one with, right? And we look at our scriptures in the Guru Granth Sahib or Guru Nanak Dev Ji, it starts with ik, right? EK or IK, however you want to, spell it, and the importance of that is oneness, right? And furthermore, connection, right? Not only connection this way, but connection this way, right? In community, in Sangat, right? And the importance of that. So just as much as I think, as substance using or, kind of being, succumb to addiction is about loneliness and separation, right? Seeking something that ultimately is futile. Recovery is about connection, right? Recovery, is about being around other people and being, secure, at peace within yourself. Interestingly enough, again, the brain, I would want you to look at that as the physiological, right, brain. And the mind is what we call psychological, right? There was a old school philosopher, Descartes, who talked about the mind is separate from the body. And that's just not true, right? There's literature, that says, or a book called Descartes' Error, right? Where he's talking about the difference. Obviously there's different stages, and Dad's obviously talked a lot about the mun and the mind. But really, is the mind a psychological manifestation of the physiological brain, right? Or is it the other way around, right? Obviously it's probably that the mind is a manifestation of the brain, right? But the point there, right, is that you can work on both of them, right? You can live your way into a new way of thinking, or you can think your way into a new way of living, right? So that's the key here. One last kind of tidbit before we wrap up, in this session. Even the word psyche, right? So psychology, psychic, right? Physical, it means soul. Right? It's a Greek, Latin, what have you word. Really, so at the end of the day, what we're talking about here is the soul, a soul sickness, right? And soul healing, right? So if we need healing and we need wellness, at our psyche level, right? Psychological level, we have to have healing in our soul, right? And that's the importance. Again, going all the way back to that first drunk at age 12, my soul felt at peace, right? But it was artificial. Right? It wasn't necessarily something that was sustainable, and the highest states of obviously meditation and connection are sustainable. Yes, they take work, right? I've been in recovery, right, where I've felt high, right? Whether it was because of that norepinephrine and epinephrine, in kind of the Christian church, we call it the holy goosebumps, right? Where you're hair stands up straight and you get the goosebumps. We call it the presence of God, right? So we talk about alignment, right? And often in my work, when I'm talking with folks, I ask them, I say, when have you had those experiences, right? We're obviously virag, right? When you start crying, your eyes well up, which is a whole nother kind of topic. But I ask folks, I was like, when do you have those experiences, right? Temperature changes will do it, right? Where the hair on the back of your neck stands up, right? So again, there's a physiological thing happening. When you're listening to music, right? Something kind of a chord, right? That nod vibration, right? Something that you connect with. When you're watching a movie and there's a scene in there that is very kind of dramatic or there's some type of connection, right? I think what I found, not only in literature but experience and also in Sangeet, is that it's a moment of connection. It's a moment of present awareness, right? When I'm fully in the present moment, right? That's healing. That's wellness, right? So again, not having that, right? Seeking that, right? Looking for that in drugs, looking for that in gambling, looking for that. And again, I'm glad I kind of thought of it. Drugs aren't the only issue, right? When we talk about gambling, we talk about pornography, sex addiction. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff, right? Again, these are all taboo things, right? Nobody wants to talk about these topics in our culture, not just our culture, in every culture, right? Nobody wants to admit. The ego doesn't want to admit, like Dad was saying, that's the first kind of step, right? And they talk about that in the recovery kind of circles in the literature. Okay, so yeah, we'll probably end it there. I appreciate this time. I know a lot of it was kind of heavy on the story. I really appreciate this first opportunity. Hopefully there'll be some more over the next, month or so. The key here, I really want folks to hear is the importance of connection, right? The importance of Sangeet, right? The importance of being a practitioner, and not even testing it, right? We'll talk a little bit more about the different types of use, whether it's experimental, right? Like, oh yeah, everybody's doing it, or, the younger you are, the more at risk you are. And again, speaking to families, in the home, if you can get the alcohol out of the home and really be connected in your child's life, that's the key, right? Dad was connected, right? Mom was connected. They were there for me, but unfortunately the world and the society, I kind of clung to that, right? We see that a little bit, in, immigrant families, right? Immigrant families that come over here, they're trying to deal with like, who am I, right? I grow up in a Sikh home or a Punjabi home, or any home, African, Cambodian, actually my buddies, some of my best friends, I got a Cambodian homie, I got a Hawaiian homie, a couple homies that are dead, I got a couple native white homies, that type of thing. And just that, like the band of misfits, right? We just didn't fit in. Unfortunately, we weren't excelling academically. We weren't excelling, kind of in the sports, collegiately or what have you. But we were excelling at drinking and smoking and kicking it, and just being in the park, right? That type of thing. But again, just focus the importance of being there for your children, right? And that starts with you too first, right? Kind of examine, make sure you yourself, right, are leading kind of a life of value and moral, right, ethics. So that way, when the time comes to be there for your child or your nephew, niece, your cousin, even your aunt or uncle, anybody for that matter, that you can start from a place, of stability and moral and ethical standing, right? And the importance that has on, the impact that has on really helping somebody else. Again, try to get the substances out of the house, the alcohol out of the house, and then being there for your loved one, right? Showing up to their games, being at the parent-teacher conferences, right? Those are some of the things, unfortunately, my parents weren't able to do, right? They didn't know English that well. They couldn't necessarily help me with my math homework, And again, it's not their fault, right? They came to this country for a better life. And again, there was people there. There was tutors I could have reached out to, right? There was probably folks that, I could have connected with, but I just wasn't able to, Like I've said, would I do it over again? Probably not, right? Why would I want to put my family and my community through that same pain, and suffering? all the lost loved ones, both financially, the impact. But, right, luckily I'm alive, right? As I've said or sprinkled it through, countless half dozen friends that are dead, right? And it's sad, right? And it continues to happen, right? Just this year, right? A couple more, and this is going back a good 10 years ago. And I'm 43 years old, right? I've been losing friends since, my 30s, right? Like I said, my best friend, in 2012, right? So, luckily I got, a couple other best friends, and we'll talk if we get a chance more about that grieving process and kind of the impact that had, but, my past has gotten me to this point, so I'm very grateful for this opportunity to share, right? At least, right, that having gone through those experiences, getting the education, hopefully we can kind of, continue to help. And the help is out there, right? I never want anybody to think that, oh, I have the answers. I'm one person. There's hundreds of me's out there, I think a lot of times, in counseling, people are real grateful. They're like, oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I'm like, you got to find the people in your community, that also have a message, because they're out there, right? 100%. I'm not that unique. Not just like my story in my using isn't that unique, right? Even in recovery, right? I'm not the end all be all, right? There are people out there, that are living this message, that are living in wellness, and it's important, right? It's important to connect to those folks. So, all right, anything that I said that might have been offensive or obviously wrong, I want to ask for forgiveness. Oh, Dad's coming in? Okay. And definitely just continue to pray, not only for, me, Dad, all of us as a Sangat, and as a community. It's important, that we continue to uplift one another, especially in these times, right? When things are fracturing even more and more and more and more. So maybe in the future, like I said, we'll talk more about mental health. We're going to talk a little bit more about, the reasons and the factors, that, folks start using and what we can do more about prevention. So again, I appreciate this opportunity to share my story. Thank you.
ਚਲੋ ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ ਜੀ। ਮੈਂ ਗੈਰੀ ਦਾ ਵੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਧੰਨਵਾਦ ਕਰਦਾ। ਬੇਸ਼ੱਕ ਮੈਂ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਫੈਮਲੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਟੁੱਟਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਜੋੜਨ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕੀਤੀ ਵੀ ਹੈ, ਜੋੜੇ ਵੀ ਹੈ, ਬਹੁਤ ਆਲਮੋਸਟ ਡਿਵੋਰਸ ਵੀ ਹੋ ਗਏ ਸੀਗੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ, ਜਾਂ ਸੈਪਰੇਟ ਵੀ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੀ। ਉਹ ਜਿੰਨੀ ਕੁ ਪਰਮਾਤਮਾ ਨੇ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਸੋਝੀ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਹੈ, ਮੈਂ ਮੋਸਟਲੀ 99% ਸਕਸੈਸਫੁਲ ਰਿਹਾ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ 'ਚ। ਪਰ ਅੱਜ ਮੈਂ ਉਹ ਗਹਿਰੀ ਦੀਆਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਸੁਣ ਕੇ ਮੈਂ ਇਹ ਤੋਂ ਵੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਕੁਛ ਲਰਨ ਕੀਤਾ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਦਾ, ਜਿਹਨਾਂ 'ਚ ਮੇਰਾ ਆਪਣਾ ਐਕਸਪੀਰੀਅੰਸ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀਗਾ। ਇਹ ਸਕੂਲ 'ਚ ਵੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਸਮਾਰਟ ਸੀਗਾ। ਮੈਨੂੰ ਮੈਂ ਕਿਉਂ ਘੱਟ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਸੀ ਉੱਦਾਂ, ਉਹ ਸੱਦ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਸੀ, ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੀ ਜੇ ਇਹ ਚੰਗੇ ਪਾਸੇ ਲੱਗ ਗਿਆ ਜੋ ਮਰਜ਼ੀ ਬਣ ਸਕਦਾ, ਵੀ ਇੰਨਾ ਇਹ ਸ਼ਾਰਪ ਆ। ਵੀ ਜੇ ਪੁੱਠੇ ਪਾਸੇ ਲੱਗ ਗਿਆ ਤੇ ਪੁੱਠੇ ਲਈ ਵੀ ਪਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਿੰਨਾ ਕੁ ਕਰ ਸਕਦਾ। ਸੋ ਲੱਕੀਲੀ ਇਹ ਦੋਨੇ ਹੀ ਕੰਮ ਕਰ ਲੈ। ਮਾਸਟਰ ਵੀ ਕੀਤੀ, ਮੈਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀਗਾ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਕਰ ਰਿਹਾ ਆ, ਪਾਰਟ ਟਾਈਮ ਕੰਮ ਵੀ ਕਰੀ ਗਿਆ ਮੈਂ। ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ। ਯਾ ਚਲੋ ਇੱਕ ਮਿੰਟ, ਯਾ ਮੈਂ ਰੱਬ ਦਾ ਵੀ ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ ਕਰਦਾ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰੂੰ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਹਰੇਕ ਹਫ਼ਤੇ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਇਹਦਾ ਕਾਉਂਸਲਿੰਗ ਕਰੇ। ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਦੀ ਆਪਣੀ ਸਾਰੀ ਸਟੋਰੀ ਲਾਈਫ ਸ਼ੇਅਰ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨਿਆਣੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਹਾਈਡ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ, ਉਹਨੂੰ ਹਾਈਡ ਨਾ ਕਰੋ, ਆਪਣੀ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਦੱਸੋ ਤਾਂ ਕਿ ਆਪਾਂ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਸੋਲਵ ਕਰ ਸਕੀਏ। ਜੇ ਹਾਈਡ ਕਰੋਗੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਹੈਲਥ ਹੀ ਖਰਾਬ ਆ। ਸੋ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਵੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸ਼ੇਅਰ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ ਹੋਰਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਉਂ ਆ ਯੂਟਿਊਬ 'ਤੇ ਇਹਦਾ ਸੁਣੋ। ਮੈਂ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰੂੰ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਹਰੇਕ ਹਫ਼ਤੇ ਲਿਆਵਾਂ, ਅਤੇ ਹਰੇਕ ਹਫ਼ਤੇ ਇਹ ਅੱਧਾ ਘੰਟਾ 1 ਘੰਟਾ ਲਾਵੇ ਆਪਣਾ ਟਾਈਮ ਕੱਢ ਕੇ। ਇੱਥੇ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦੇ ਘਰਾਂ 'ਚ ਉਹ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਫੋਨ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਆ ਜਾਂ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਆ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ, ਜਾ ਕੇ ਕਾਉਂਸਲਿੰਗ ਕਰਦਾ। ਗੁੱਡ ਥਿੰਗ ਇਹਦੀ ਇਹ ਆ ਵੀ ਇਹਦਾ ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸ਼ਨ ਕਰਕੇ ਸ਼ੇਅਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦਾ ਕਿਸੇ ਦੀ ਸਟੋਰੀ। ਆਪਣੇ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ 'ਚ ਕਈ ਵਾਰੀ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਆ, ਉਹ ਇੱਕ ਦੂਜੇ ਦੀ ਸ਼ੇਅਰ ਕਰ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਹੀ। ਤਾਂ ਇਹਦੇ 'ਚ ਇਹ ਗੁੱਡ ਕੁਆਲਿਟੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ, ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ, ਇਹ ਸ਼ੇਅਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦੇ, ਆਪਣਾ ਸੀਕਰਟ ਰੱਖਦੇ ਉਸ ਚੀਜ਼ ਨੂੰ। ਕੋਈ ਵੀ ਬੱਚਾ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਆ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ, ਜਾਂ ਜੇ ਕੋਈ ਟਾਈਮ ਹੋਵੇ ਤਾਂ ਇਹ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਹੈਲਪ ਕਰੂਗਾ। ਹੋਪਲੀ ਮੈਂ ਰੱਬ ਅੱਗੇ ਪ੍ਰੇ ਕਰਦਾ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਕਰਿਓ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਕੰਟੀਨਿਊ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਸਮਝਾਵੇ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਇੱਧਰ ਫਸ ਚੁੱਕੇ ਆ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਪਰਮਾਤਮਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕੱਢੇ। ਸੋ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੰਟੀਨਿਊ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ। ਹੁਣ ਮੇਰੇ 10 ਮਿੰਟ ਰਹਿ ਗਏ ਆ, ਫਿਰ ਮੇਰੀ ਉਹ ਦੂਜੀ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਹੋਣੀ ਆ 5 ਵਜੇ। ਸੋ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦਾ ਧੰਨਵਾਦ। ਮੈਂ ਹਰੇਕ ਹਫ਼ਤੇ ਨੂੰ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰੂੰਗਾ ਲਿਆਵੇ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਇੰਨਾ ਪੜ੍ਹਿਆ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਨਹੀਂ ਗਾ, ਮੈਂ ਤਾਂ ਸਿੰਪਲ ਜਿਹਾ ਆ। ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਐਜੂਕੇਸ਼ਨ ਵੀ ਹੈ ਸਰ, ਇਹ ਬੈਟਰ ਸਮਝਾ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ। ਮੈਂ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ 'ਚ ਉਹ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਸਮਝਾ ਸਕਦਾ, ਪਰ ਬੱਚੇ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਇੰਗਲਿਸ਼ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ। ਸੋ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ।